Hi everyone, Fenris Models here, and today we'll be taking a look at my build of Italeri's 1/48 scale A-18F Super Hornet in US Navy colors. Before I began to remove the pieces from the sprue, I gave the instructions a quick look over to see if there's anything worth annotating. I like to make sure I emphasize things like places where I'll need to drill holes, parts that need removing, and even writing out which paints I'll need if there are any stages that require paint during assembly, such as with the cockpit portions. Starting with the cockpit, each piece was removed from the sprue with some sprue cutters. Any excess plastic from the gate, mold lines, or flash was then trimmed up with a fresh hobby blade. Assembly was easy enough, though it did need to be completed in stages in order to accommodate the painting. Both cockpit tub parts received a coat of Vallejo Surface Primer USN Light Ghost Gray 70.615. You'll see me using this a lot on this build, and no, there isn't really a reason why I'm using the surface primer over one of the normal paints, other than just my hand happened to grab the wrong bottle and I didn't really realize it until later on in the build. Other pieces were picked out in model color black 70.950. This included the instrument panels and the sides of the seats. The seat cushions were painted with Model Air USAF Olive Drab 71.016, and the injection handle got some yellow striping. Once all of the paint was dry, it was time for the instrument panel decals. There were a total of 6 decals needed here, one on both consoles and then 2 on each side of both of the seats. The decals, being cartographed, went on quite nicely. A simple soak in warm water to release from the backing paper, and they slid into place with no problem. Once into position, each decal received a light coat of microsol to allow them to conform to the surface. Once dry, the seats and consoles could be installed to each half of the cockpit tub, and then the two could be joined together. The rest of the assembly was pretty straightforward. I'm not going to go through each step individually here, partially because I think that's a little boring to watch, but also because half of them I was so in the flow I forgot to click on record on OBS, so suffice it to say, if you're mindful of your parts and follow the instructions, it all goes together quite well. The caveat to this is if you want to display your model with the landing gear up. The kit does not include parts to do this, so you need to modify the existing ones, primarily in the form of just simply snipping the tabs off of the covers. The covers are for the most part the right size, though you'll see that the front landing gear covers are a little smaller than they should be. It's a little fiddly to work with, but definitely not the worst I've ever dealt with. The last thing that needed building before we can start painting are all of the munitions. In total, there are 10 different units, 5 on each wing. I'll admit to not knowing much about modern munitions, or loadouts for that matter. I simply followed what the instructions said, but I've since been informed that what Italeri has you do is actually a little bit of an odd one, so you may want to do some research and look into possibly changing that up. These were then held off the plane until after it was painted. If I'd put them on first, there wouldn't have been a lot of room to maneuver the airbrush between them, so I figured this was just the easier solution. The canopy was then installed and masked with Tamiya masking tape. This was easy enough to do with the relative lack of a cockpit frame, at least compared to World War II fighters. The tape was just placed on the glass, the frame was then traced with a cocktail stick, and a sharp hobby blade then trimmed away any excess. And finally, on to painting. If you follow my content, you know that generally I'm a proponent of pre-shading, but I wanted to just try something different this time. So instead, I'll be giving this one a black base, followed by some marbling. I start with a single coat of model color black, 70.950, applied evenly over the entire model. The black is allowed to dry, then using Model Air White, I randomly made little squiggles all over the model, making sure to avoid places that I want to have some level of pre-shading, such as panel lines, places where the shadows naturally gather, those kind of places. This process is methodical, and it's definitely both more time intensive and labor intensive compared to my regular pre-shading. The airbrush is held much closer to the model than I usually do, and the pressure is turned all the way down to 12 to 15 psi. This is to prevent the paint from pooling and allows me to get a very crisp line on the airbrush. What this does is, when we apply the color over the base, instead of just getting a pre-shade, we'll also have some tonal variation in the paint, which replicates the fading and deterioration of the paint job that you would see with use. Now, fair warning to those with frail constitutions about the upcoming section. In it, you're gonna see something possibly unsettling, and that is, I'm not gonna be using the right color grays for this plane. They will be approximations and really rather close, but if that's too much for you, feel free to jump ahead to this point here. Okay, still here? Good, we can move on to actually painting the main colors of the plane. The belly and underside of the plane was given a coat of Model Air USAF Light Gray, 71.276. This is applied lightly so as to allow all of that tonal variation that we made with the white to show through. It's very easy here to layer on the paint too thickly and cancel out all of that work. It's annoying when that happens to a pre-shading job, but here, when the marbling took hours to complete, it would be downright infuriating. So remember to keep your coats nice and light. Now, my recording camera's gain is a little off, but you can see some of that tonal variation showing through, already giving the plane a subtle weathering effect. The same thing was done to the top side, but with that surface primer USN Light Ghost Gray 70.615. And unfortunately, because of the opacity of the primer, you can see that the marbling effect isn't really coming through at all on the top side. The gray was given some time to set up before I masked off the portions that would be receiving some red paint. The whole center section there was given some model color flat red, 70.957. Again, it was applied light enough so the marbling would at least show through here. I really like how stark the red came out against the grays, but do let me know what you think in the comments below. The tail fins were also masked and given a coat of the same Model Air white. And then the engine nozzles in Mecha Color Gunmetal 69.058. The munitions were then hand painted up in white, light ghost gray, or USAF olive drab as appropriate. I do apologize, I lost the footage for this portion when last week's attempt at this video failed, and somehow it corrupted the files. Each was then attached to their pylon, and then the pylon was attached to the plane in the position indicated. The kit was taken outside for a quick coat of Mr. Super Clear Gloss from a rattle can. While that dried, I went about organizing the decals for this kit. There were a lot, including this massive spade decal. I decided to cut this one into 5 pieces to make it easier to apply around the antenna on the fuselage. Once the gloss varnish was dry, I could apply the decals. Same as before, they just took a quick soak in water before getting slid into place. A cotton bud was used to soak up any excess water and press any air or water out from under the decal. Some of the decals did take a little finagling to get into place correctly with all of the contours of the kit. These and any larger decals would get a coat or two of microsol until they laid down nicely. Now on this kit, the giant spade was what I was stressing the most about. However, once it was sliced into 5, it was fairly easy to align all of the pieces to the antenna and to each other, making it a relative breeze in the end. All it needed was some microsol to blend the edges together, and you can barely tell it was cut apart. With that complete, it was time to do the panel lining with Tamiya Panel Line Accent Color Brown. I opted for brown over my usual black because I think with the marbling effect making the overall finish more realistic than I usually do, it was just going to turn out better. I let this sit for a short bit to dry a little. Then, I used a cotton bud that was damp with Artist White Spirits, but not wet, and cleaned up the excess panel liner. While cleaning up the lines, I made sure to wipe in the direction of either airflow or gravity so I could use the lingering brown as a slight dirt or grime layer on the plane. Once I was happy with the effect, the model was taken outside for one last varnish, this time in Mr. Super Clear Matte from a rattle can. I waited for the varnish to dry, removed the canopy mask, and called this one good. I thoroughly enjoyed this build. As I've mentioned earlier, I was quite worried how some of these large decals were going to turn out, but I think they did great. After all, the decals were cartograph. As for the black basing and marveling versus pre-shading, not sure I'm sold on it. It looks great, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure that the effort to improvement ratio is a good one. And really that statement is, I just don't know. I'm willing to experiment a little more to see if anything changes my mind, and I'll admit part of it is probably due to how little the effect's shown through the top layer. I'm fairly sure the fault there lies with the primer instead of using a normal paint like I should have, but it was a bit of a letdown all the same. With that said though, I am so very happy with how this kit turned out. I think this is one of the better kits I've done, and actually does have me more interested in doing more modern aircraft. Definitely let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see more modern aircraft, and which ones. Thank you to my gift set tiered patron Calibear and to all of my starter set patrons. Your support means the world to me. And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and leave a comment. If you're new around here, don't forget to also hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to see more of my content as it goes live. If you want to watch more of my content now, instead of waiting for that next video, how about checking out one of these videos here? Either way, I hope you're staying safe this holiday season. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and remember, keep modeling.